Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reach. This is your host, Jessica Mann. I'm the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group, and I am especially excited to welcome our guest today, Laura Vanderkam. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. So, Laura, for those who don't know, has literally revolutionized the way that millions of people think about their time and their priorities, and dramatically altered the way that we think about our most finite resource, which is, of course, time. Laura Vanderkam is best-selling author, speaker, podcaster, and one of the most respected voices in time management and productivity. She is the author of multiple best-selling books, including, I want to get these all correct, 168 Hours, I Know How She Does It, I love that title, Off the Clock, What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, and Tranquility by Tuesday. And her viral TED Talk, for those who haven't yet seen it, on how busy people find time has literally been viewed millions of times across the globe. She also hosts 3 podcasts, Before Breakfast, Best of Both Worlds, and The New Corner Office, which cover everything from daily productivity habits to work-life balance and how to thrive in the modern workplace. Is that about accurate?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, yeah, it is good. It's very impressive. It's you. As part of her research, Laura has analyzed real-time diaries from hundreds of professionals, uncovering what people actually do with their time versus what they think they do. And your work challenges a lot of the most common narratives that we have around burnout, busyness, and just an overall lack of time for our life. You have a new book coming out. It's called Big Time, A Simple Path to Time Abundance, and that comes out this May. So for executive assistants, which is, largely our audience, Laura, they themselves are wizards of time management, right? And efficiency experts. That's why they're hired to do the jobs that they do. So when it comes to prioritizing their executive's workload along with their own, I think this whole conversation around time management and how we view time could not be more relevant. So really excited that you can join us today. And I mean, as the queen of time, the fact that you're making time for us means so much to us. So thank you on behalf of myself and behalf of our listeners.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat about this topic.
Great. So you were recently a guest on the Mel Robbins podcast, and you made a statement there which really kind of stopped me in my tracks when you said it, which is that how we spend our time is how we spend our life. And if ever there was an invitation to really reflect upon time management and to take that topic seriously, I think that's it, right? I mean, in when you aggregate all of the hours and where has my life gone and what has it amounted to, it's the time, right? Your time is your life. So tell us more about why you do the work that you do and what you hope your followers will take from your work.
So I find the topic of time fascinating because we all have the same amount of it, right? Like everybody has 24 hours in a day. Everybody has 168 hours in a week. And so when you find people who are doing amazing things professionally, they're really changing the world, doing awesome stuff, and then you talk to them and realize that they have cool personal lives too. I mean, maybe they're raising happy families, they're involved in their communities, all this stuff. Like, they're not making the harsh trade-offs success often seems to require. Like, these people don't have any more time than the rest of us. And that's what I find so fascinating. Maybe some people are richer or better looking than the rest of us, but nobody has more time. We are all working with the exact same building blocks. And all of us, what our lives look like are going to be a function of how we spent our hours. And so each day-to-day decision of how we spend our hours builds into this larger life. And the question is, of course, well, what do we want that life to look like? And how we spend our hours is what's going to lead to our lives looking like we want our lives to look. So I'm always hoping that people will take from my work, a sense that they can make choices about how they spend the 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week, and that we can build the lives we want in the time that we've got. I really do think time is big enough to encompass what matters to us.
I love that as a concept, and I'm excited to hear more about how you make that happen. I'm not going to lie, when I first saw 168 hours, I didn't know what that meant. And so I pulled up my calculator and I said, okay, if I multiply 24 by 7, I get 168. So that is exactly what you're referring to, is this kind of finite block, this window. So when you look at that resource, what do you consider sort of spoken for time, and what do you consider fungible time? And what sort of leeway is there really between our obligations and the fungibility that we have left with our time?
Well, the most obvious set thing is sleep. We all have to do that. And some people try to skimp on it occasionally, but I feel like in many cases our bodies will force us to catch up on it. So there's a certain amount that most of us need to sleep every week. I've been tracking my time for a long time, and I know that I tend to sleep somewhere between 7.3 and 7.4 hours per day when you average it over a longer period of time. So we're talking about 51 hours a week. So that is set for me. It's different amounts for different people, but let's say, somebody's 56 hours a week, so 8 hours a night for 7 days a week. So then you've got the rest of the time. And obviously there are things we have to do. Most people are working to some degree or another, and I know listeners of this podcast certainly are. Many of us have, obligations that are part of caregiving responsibilities, taking care of family members, things like that. However, many of those things are at least slightly malleable. And even if we do have a reasonable amount of have-to-dos, there's often still space for discretionary time as well. I mean, numbers I like to use for people, there are 168 hours in a week. So if you sleep 8 hours a night, 56 hours per week, and work 40 hours a week, so standard full-time job, you've got 72 hours for other things. Now, I know many people work more than that, but if you work 50 hours a week, you've got 62 hours for other things. If you find yourself working 60 hours a week for some reason, well, you've still got 52 hours for other things. Like, we're still talking a fair chunk of time, even with fairly long work hours. We have caregiving responsibilities. We have to do housework, take care of ourselves in that time. But again, it tends not to consume all of it. And when people look at the whole of a week, they start to see that even if I have not as much free time as I want, I do tend to have some. And I think that's a very empowering message. And then we can start to ask, well, what do I want to do with it?
Mm-hmm. How do you think about things that some people might consider historically kind of dead time, right? And I'm thinking about things like, I happen to live in a very rural area. So for me to get anywhere is a solid 45 minutes. So how do you encourage people to look at things like that are just sort of like space that you can't necessarily do a whole lot with?
Yeah, well, there's a difference between time being, pure, like discretionary time. You can do whatever you want with it. A lot of time we have has some constraints on it. So examples would be time you are in the car, might also be, time you're at work, but it's not busy for some reason. This could be time you are home with your family. Maybe you have young kids, so you can't just leave, but they don't need your immediate supervision right that second. So again, that's time. It's got some constraints on it, but it can also be used. And I think one of the real time management master moves is figuring out how you can convert some of this time from feeling like dead time to feeling like it's something you can actually do something with. So people have all sorts of creative ways, to turn time into the car into something else. Often that's by listening to things, but sometimes it's by having other people in the car with you. That can be a way to, spend that time in a different way. Or sometimes it's by changing the order of how things are done, so you're in the car less for that. Same with, time at home. Like, we have young kids at home, but maybe they don't need your immediate supervision. A lot of people spend that time kind of on our electronic hobbies of scrolling around, looking at stuff online because it's easy to do and you could fit in if somebody needs you. But there's other things you can do too. Some people use that time to read or to, call a friend who doesn't mind if you get distracted in that time. So lots of things we can do. And I think a real time management master move is trying to repurpose some of that time from lower value uses to higher value.
Yeah. And that's definitely a theme that I've noticed in your body of work, is just really being aware of the narrative that we form around time, and even just my choice of word, right? Dead time. Like, rebranding that in a more productive way, right? And just reinterpreting that time. What's your stance on multitasking? Because, there's so many different competing thoughts on that, and so many different experts that weigh in and say multitasking is not really realistic. People don't actually multitask, that what they do is they lose a lot of time, switching between tasks, things like that. What's your thought on that as far as increasing time leverage?
Well, I think using that word time leverage is a good one there, because often we can sort of deepen time and make it feel a little bit more like we're doing two things at once, as long as it's two things that are different, right? So we're talking about you driving somewhere and you are listening to, a course online that you are learning, and you are also driving at the same time. And that's fine. Like, that's a way to deepen that time and to leverage it more. For instance, many people love to exercise with friends. If you go for a walk or a run with a friend, you are both building that relationship and you are getting some exercise. So it's a wonderful way to multitask. Now, where we get into trouble is if we are trying to be in a meeting and answer email at the same time. That's when we often kind of risk things going awry. Like, you're not paying attention to one or the other because they're pretty much using the same parts of the brain. And, sometimes that happens. Although generally, if you're in a meeting you're so not a part of that you can be on email, then maybe it's a question of whether you really needed to be in that meeting in the first place. And maybe that's a deeper question we can look into.
Yeah. So you've been very open publicly about this very full and rich life that you lead on a personal level. You're a mother of 5 children, 5 humans. You're a wife. You have a clearly thriving career, very much sought after, very productive as a professional. And then you also have time for hobbies. You sing in a choir and you do other things. And I'd love to understand, not just kind of taking off the theorist hat for a moment and actually just talking to you, Laura, as a person. Like, where do you find these economies of scale in your world? And is there a trade-off somewhere that's happening? Like, behind the scenes, is every meal secretly DoorDashed, right? Or do you have an army of people that are helping? Do you have 3 nannies? Like, what's the deal? I think that, it would be so fascinating to be able to peer into how you maneuver in your personal realm.
Yeah, well, I do have a nanny. With 5 kids, I cannot drive everyone, for instance, where they are going at the time they need to be there. So we need a extra adult around, at least for that. And also just because school hours are not work hours, as many people know.
Yep.
So unless I plan to end my workday at approximately 2:45, which is not going to work, then I need additional help in the afternoon. So yes, that is part of it for sure. But I think it's also about I'm really a big fan of my weekly planning ritual. And this is, if anyone ever asks me how do you make the pieces of everything fit together? And, many times they don't, but when they are, it's because I'm doing my weekly planning ritual faithfully and well, which is that once a week, at the end of the week, I sit down and I look ahead toward the next Monday to Sunday week. And I look at my calendar, I've got a page in my planner, and I list out what is most important in all 3 spheres of life that I consider the main areas. So what is going on for my career? Like, what is most important to me professionally over the next week? And then what is most important in my relationships, like with my friends and family? right? So what's going on with there? What do I need to be aware of, paying attention to, trying to see happen? And then finally, self. What is most important for my physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health over the next week? What steps am I taking toward longer goals in that? And, where can those fit in? So I'm figuring out what is most important in all three spheres, figuring out where those things can go. And then I'm also looking at what is already on my calendar in those three spheres and saying, well, okay, am I prepared for those things? Do I have a plan for that? What are the logistics? What could go wrong? And how am I going to deal with all that? And so I spend some time really thinking about that. And by the end of that weekly planning time, I have my marching orders for the next week. Like, I know what's most important. I know what's coming up. I know what I plan to do over the next week. I've thought about the most likely things that could go wrong, and I've tried to come up with a way to deal with those. And that makes me just feel so much more in control of everything. And obviously life happens. I mean, stuff comes up. But I find that when you know what's most important for you to focus on, like, even if time gets taken away from you, you know what to do in the time you still have. Whereas if you have no idea, like, you haven't thought it through, you haven't prioritized, then you're kind of just grasping whatever is right in front of you. Like, when things go wrong, you're like, but what should I do next? I don't know. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do this. And who knows if that was what you should have been doing or not. So having that moment where you step back and think about it is what makes everything possible.
I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think that's a beautiful segue into where an executive assistant can really help their executive employ a lot of these strategies that you talk about and that you espouse and really implement, right? And a lot of it comes to that forecasting, that planning. So going back to your research, all of it is built on data from actual time diaries and logs of real people. When you zoom out across all of that data, what are the biggest gaps that you tend to see between where professionals think their time goes and where it actually goes?
Yeah, so one of the most fascinating things to me is the difference between how many hours people sometimes think they work and how much they actually work. And I'm not saying that people aren't working hard and working long, and anyone who gets paid by the hour obviously knows how much they work, all right? Like, that's it's more when we're in a kind of the salaried world where things are a little bit more nebulous. It is human nature to remember stressful moments as prominent, right? Negative things stand out in the mind more than positive ones. So when you wind up working late some night, this becomes your story. Like, I'm working late all the time. I'm working all these hours, right? If you have to work on the weekend, like let's say you have to check in the email, a couple times on the weekend and getting stuff set up for the next week, you can wind up with a story of like, I'm working around the clock on the weekend. Even if each check was something like 15 minutes and you did it 4 times, right? Like, okay, that was an hour. That wasn't around the clock. But we build these things up in our minds because, again, it's outside sort of what we think maybe we should be doing, or it's time we don't really want to be doing it, right? And so all those things amplify it in our brains. And so you have people talking about like their 80-hour work weeks, their 100-hour work weeks, I always laugh about the young man at a party who told me he was working 180 hours a week at his startup, which, you did the math of multiplying 24 times 7. Yeah, it's like not actually possible, but it sounded good. So there is a lot of this work week inflation going on. Oh, you worked 60 hours this week. I wish I worked 60. I worked 70. Oh, you worked 70.
Yeah.
70 is my life.
There's
season.
A lot of machismo
exactly.
around, the working week.
There is so much machismo around it. Yeah. And it's neither here nor there. Like, if people want to talk about how many hours they're working, that's fine by me. The problem is that when you don't actually know what a work week truly looks like, it's very hard to assign different proportions to different things. Like, how much time should I be spending on strategic thinking and planning? How much time should I be spending on administration? How much time should I be spending on, for your executives you're working with, internal meetings, external meetings? I don't know. But if you don't know how many hours you are working with, you are just guessing. The numerator of a fraction and the denominator. You just have no idea. And sometimes I have run into problems with this of like, I used to think I work 50 hours a week. And I'd tracked my time here and there over the years, and I'd seemed to work 50 hours a week. And I started tracking my time continuously about 11 years ago. And I realized that in the past I had chosen very specific weeks to track, namely the weeks when I was working 50 hours a week, because, it looked good to me. Like, I'm a busy lady, right? I feel like I wasn't making progress on certain projects, but that's because I thought I was working 50 hours a week, and I wasn't. I was working 40. The long-term average was 40. And so I have 10 hours that I think I can assign to things, but those 10 hours aren't really there. Like, they go away because stuff happens, It's like we get called away to things. There's, a kid is sick, or, you take a day off or something. You have a dentist appointment in the middle of the day. And all these things wind up compressing the work week, and meant that, when I got more serious about it, I realized, okay, if I'm working 40 hours a week, I cannot take on as much as I could if I thought I was working 50. And so I need to be more strategic about it.
In your TED Talk that we talked about earlier, you discuss how when people say, I don't have time, often it's really an expression of this is not a priority, right? And so I'm thinking about the executive assistants, and I'm thinking about the fact that they're largely responsible for safeguarding and optimizing the time of their executives, which is legitimately very constrained. It may not be 186 hours, as the attendee at the party said, constrained, but it's definitely constrained. So how as an executive assistant, can they distinguish between what an executive says they don't have time for, and what time is truly spoken for an executive, versus where there may be an opportunity to add something to the schedule, or make something more of a priority? How do they distinguish between an executive's priorities and what they truly don't have time for?
I mean, I think the best way is just communication. And hopefully you have a time when you're sitting down with the person you're working with, and really talking it through. What is a priority for you? What is not? And you can't just ask it straightforward necessarily like that, though. I mean, it helps to say, like, okay, let's look through your calendar for the last, couple weeks. We can sort of look at this retrospectively. What of all this did you feel was most impactful? And as you're thinking about that, what would you like to spend more time doing? And as you look at how you spent your time over the last few weeks, are there things you think were not as good a use of your time? Like in the future, you'd like to maybe minimize that a little bit more. And that will give the person some things to think about, and a little bit more lead to talk about, of like, oh yeah, well, I had this meeting with Bob, and it was great. I mean, we came up with all these great things, and I think it was great because of this. And you're like, okay, now I've got that as a framework for future meetings that I'm going to prioritize versus others. And then, also look at what's on the calendar for the next few weeks. I think in general, everyone should be doing a calendar triage as they go into the next, few weeks, and say, okay, here's a time where I am looking at my calendar, or looking at my executive's calendar. What of this do we think is really important? Right? Stuff can still creep on there, even if you don't want it to, even if you are safeguarding it. Stuff can wind up in there, and you need to sit down and triage looking forward. Okay, it's going to be a busy week. So look forward to the next few weeks and say, okay, these things really are critical that I do. And if anything, I would like to expand the time that I am spending on this. These other things, I mean, yeah, it's nice to do, but it's not critical right now. So working together, maybe we can push those forward a little bit and see if we can spend some less time on it. So really that framework of what do I want to spend more time on, and that framework of what I want to spend less time on can help as we are setting these priorities.
How else do you recommend that executive assistants and executives work together to best optimize? Like, for example, you mentioned communication, and that's clearly paramount, but would you recommend that executive assistants do some of the time tracking and time diaries that you do?
I absolutely would. I mean, I think everyone should track their time. So executive assistants should, the executives should as well. One thing you can do as an executive assistant is assist in tracking your executive's time. And there have actually been some interesting like CEO time diary studies that have been based on executive assistants reporting back what the person they were working with was actually doing with their time in the course of the day, because they have a really good insight into that. And then obviously that person themselves would have to report for more of the after hours stuff. But it was, definitely an easier way to keep track of it at work. But yes, track it. Because the metrics are often interesting. Often people are spending more time on things that are not as high a priority to them. And you want to nip that in the bud as much as you can. Like an executive's time is, in fact, their most valuable resource. And when it can be spent on high value things, it can move the needle on company performance. But it's often very tempting to spend it on not priority things because they're just there and everyone's asking for time. So, you can do your best to keep track of it and analyze it together. One of the funnier things I've seen people do is sometimes have a little bit of a good cop, bad cop thing going on. And, in order to protect the executive's time, that person will often say, "Oh, I'd love to talk about this topic. I'll have Jessica find some time for us. Jessica, let's look at this maybe on a Friday." Right. And that is code to Jessica that this is not a top priority. Not a priority. We can move this forward indefinitely.
Yeah. Push this one down a little bit. So I Know How She Does It, you studied how high achieving women actually spend their 168 hours. And some of that research talks about how working women, particularly with families, really get creative with their schedules, right? Whether it's splitting shifts or working after the kids went to bed or working while taking kids to activities or things of that nature, or using the flexibility of remote work to blend responsibilities and do some of that multitasking. And I feel like this honestly describes probably 80% of the executive assistants that we work with. They are oftentimes career women and mothers. So what did you learn in that work about how people are able to carve out time for what matters? And also, what does the data suggest about hybrid or flexible work models?
I really think that flexibility matters a lot more than hours worked. And there's been some research on this, that when people are able to choose to some degree where they are working and when they are working, they can work a lot more hours before they experience work-family conflict versus if they have to be in a certain place at a certain time. Then that work-life conflict rears its head quite early in terms of total number of hours worked. So, if you are, an executive who is really wanting to get great performance and wants a great person, allowing for, flexible and remote work is probably one of the best ways you can do for that. So I'm a big fan. With that, of course, then I find that, particularly in I Know How She Does It, I found that, women who are very into their careers often value time spent on work, and they're the things they want to do within their working hours. And they tend to value that more than, for instance, watching television. And so they would organize their schedules so that time when the average person would be watching videos or streaming something or watching TV, they would use that for work. And then they could preserve family time and sort of higher value leisure time and not necessarily be working during that time. So you mentioned the split shift. This was a slightly more of a thing before remote work became as common as it is. But I would see people leave the office at a reasonable hour. So let's say they head out right at 4:30, 5 o'clock, get home, spend time with young kids who go to bed relatively early. But if your baby goes down at 7:30 at night, well, now what are you doing? Well, you could watch TV, but you could also work, right? And so if you consciously use that time to leave earlier in the day instead of working straight through to 6 or 7, which, then you wouldn't see the baby, you could have family time and then substitute TV time for work time versus, work time and family time being a trade-off. And so that is something people would do. Same with working at kids' activities. We, as parents, we spend a lot of time driving kids to activities and then sitting there and then driving them home. And I look around in the stands and I see parents on their phone and they're watching YouTube shorts. And I'm like, well, that's one thing you could be doing. But people who think about it use this for other things. And, I try to, for instance, if I need to read for work, that's something I will spend that time doing. Or sometimes I do some of my planning swing at an activity, or, catch up on emails that I've chosen that I need to address at a certain point. So there's lots of ways that you can work flexibly, but still get the hours in, and yet not take any time away from higher value personal activities you would have been doing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the challenge with that, because I completely agree that I think that especially as family women and professionals, that flexibility piece is everything. I mean, it's what literally allows, it's the grease in the wheels. Without it, I don't think any of this is possible. And I think the challenge, though, oftentimes is there's sort of the employers who get it, and then there's the employers who don't. And that can be a real challenge.
It can be. And so I would encourage any employers listening to this to think about that you want better people. You become an employer of choice by having a more flexible environment, treating people as adults, that you have very exacting standards for getting your work done. But the when and where may be a little bit less important. Now, that said, obviously, we all are in different places at different times and have jobs at certain times for reasons, And if you find yourself in that situation, it becomes even more important to track your time, because you want to know what your work truly does look like, because you can often start to see patterns. And then you can, say like, okay, well, I can probably be reasonably likely to get time for family and personal stuff in this window. I am less likely to get it in these other times, and it's just good to be aware of that. Also, if you are at a place that's less flexible, it's very important to negotiate for things like paid time off, right? And then you can use that to get flexibility, even if you can't just sort of take it quite in the same way that one would hope.
Can that be the focus of your next book, Laura?
Maybe.
How to ask and get for that. I mean, I'd love to get your reaction to a trend that we're seeing a lot, which is this whole concept of a 996 work week, which is we work 9 to 9, so 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And it's called the 996. And have you heard of it before?
Who is doing this?
a lot of people. Well, here's the irony. So we have a lot of our clients are Bay Area based, San Francisco Bay Area based, and a ton of our tech clients are requiring this.
So here's what I will tell you, because I have seen people and seen logs from a great many people in sort of the startup tech universes, or, various other industries known for long hours. People are not actually working from 9 to 9. What they are doing, many times they are in whatever that ball pit is that they were, given the foosball table, they're sitting at the cafeteria for, an hour. I had jobs like this early in my career where, you got to order dinner if you stayed there after 8 p.m. Well, guess what we were doing? If you were there at 7 and you didn't have anything else going on that night, like, you pretend to work for another hour. There's a point of diminishing returns. And much of the time spent at places that require long hours is not actually spent working. And I can tell you that from looking at the time logs of places like this. And so I think you really have to ask yourself, if you are running one of those businesses, like, why? Like, what does this do for you? And I mean, I don't know. If you've got a compelling reason that somebody spending an hour at that foosball table is adding to your bottom line versus them getting to go home an hour earlier, I'd be open to hearing it.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard a really good one yet.
I mean, I would be fascinated to see you in a discussion with one of those leaders, because it's a real challenge for us on the recruiting side, as you can imagine, right? That's a hard sell. It's a very hard sell.
It's a hard sell.
And I think that more often than not, what I hear are kind of like two primary arguments, which is, one, it's all about the culture, and they really are looking for to indoctrinate as almost like a family type of culture. And you're with us, and you're joining us, and you're joining a culture and a family, and an affiliation group. You're not just simply taking on a job. And I think that those foosball moments, or whatever you want to call them, or the moments spent chatting and sitting on the couch and catching up and building that rapport, are essential in their view for this culture to thrive and function. So it's often the cultural argument, or it's this sense of we've got to beat the competition. And there's this sense of like just frenetic intensity to be first to market, to capture more market share, to, especially if we're talking about AI companies and things that are like especially, relevant right now. There's a huge sense of we got to beat out everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that people may feel that way. The problem, of course, is that you're going to have a real trouble recruiting anyone who doesn't want work to be their primary family, because they may have another family like that they're actually related to. And so, then I don't know, maybe it's true that all the best people out there in the world are those who are completely unattached to anyone else in humanity. That said, I will tell you that if you are working 9 to 9, 6 days a week, that is 72 hours. It is still not 168 hours, right? So one thing you could do, if you do happen to be in this situation, is,
Right.
you're sleeping 8 hours a night and you've got, 72 work hours. Like you do, in fact, still have some hours for other things. It may not be as much as you want, obviously,
Yeah.
but, it might still be possible to go for a run from 6 to 6:45, and then if you work really close to the office, I'm guessing a lot of people come in late if there's a 9 to 9 kind of thing. People sort of drift in toward 9:30, but hey, great, then you could spend 6:45 to 9 with your family in the morning on those days, and when you think of it that way, like,
Right.
you could fit in other things. I think it's silly to have a culture doing that, but on the other hand, you can, even with that work hour requirement,
Sure.
fit some other things around it.
Yeah. Fair. So going back to this whole idea of the time that we have to spend versus the time that we want to spend, and there's sort of the have-tos and the want-tos. I'm thinking about things like taxes, right? Like, how do we make things like that less charged, and how do we reshape our narrative and what we attach to those activities that we don't really want to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's always some activities in life that we don't want to do and have to get done. I think it helps to, make a list of these, make sure you know what's coming up, assign a time to it, and then don't assign too much else. I mean, the problem people have is they're like, I got to do my taxes this weekend, and I also need to clean out my garage, and I need to, organize all the summer clothes, and I need to do X, Y, and Z. You are not going to do all those things in a weekend. I mean, maybe like if you assign taxes to one weekend and then, any mop up of it to the next weekend, like then it will get done, right? Whereas if you are assigning too many projects to your time outside of work, it's probably just not going to happen. And so you need to be kind of realistic about that. I'm always telling people, like, especially on weekends, you want to assign yourself one thing beyond kind of life maintenance in terms of projects. And you can assign yourself fun stuff. That's great. Like, do as much fun stuff as you want. But if you have various projects you need to do on weekends, assign yourself one thing beyond life maintenance, and then you will do it. And then you can move on to a next project next weekend. And you do another project the next weekend. But, when you keep staring down a list that has 10 things on it every weekend, you're just going to feel defeated and you're not going to do any of it.
Yeah. And the procrastination sets in. And I think that's it too, is I feel like the things that we have a really negative narrative around inevitably cause us to procrastinate. And the amount of time we spend hemming and hawing about it is a lot. And so that's where I'm thinking, how do we approach it in such a way as to shift the framing around that?
Yeah, well, I think in general, having a match between expectations and reality is a good idea. And then we feel like we're getting stuff done. It's great.
In What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, you found that many high performers have very intentional morning rituals, whether it's exercise or quiet time or doing more of the focused work before the demands of the day kick in. What patterns among those individuals really stood out to you? And what does the research say specifically about why mornings are really precious?
Well, for many people, mornings are precious precisely because it is time that you can have for yourself before everybody else needs something from you. I mean, you mentioned a 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. work schedule. If that is the case, most of the stuff you're going to do other than work is going to have to occur before 9 a.m. But, for many of us, there are hours before 9 a.m. And those could be used. And I've also, modern workplace is very demanding, obviously, and people need energy for it. And one of the ways you get energy is by exercising. I mean, there is just a general understanding, I think, with a lot of people that you are going to have to find space for exercise at some point in your life, which, by the way, a lot of those places, the 9 to 9, there's some fitness thing there too. People are going to the gym during the day. I mean, we're taking time away. And I'm a big fan of exercising. But again, if you do that between 9 and 9, then that's not work time. But anyway, mornings are a great time for getting stuff done. If there are things you want to do in life and you are not finding time for it the rest of the day, trying to build it into a morning routine might be the way to go. So, I would see again and again people who had full-time jobs, had families, if they were doing something else, if they were exercising regularly, if they were, working on a novel, most likely it was going to be happening in the morning, because by the time you're done with the day and your other responsibilities, it's hard to do anything else. Most people are not going to rally themselves to write the great American novel at night. But, maybe at 6 a.m. you will.
So another of your books, Tranquility by Tuesday, you talk about 9 rules for building a calmer and more intentional week. So for those of us, which I think are many of us, feel like we exist in reaction mode, which of those 9 rules do you think creates the biggest shift? And how would you encourage someone to get started?
So rule number 1 was to give yourself a bedtime. And this was rule number 1 for a reason, because people changed their entire relationship with time, first by getting regular, orderly sleep. I've found that most people get a reasonable amount of sleep over the course of a week. The problem is that we tend to undershoot on some nights and overshoot on others. Like you're skimping on sleep on Monday and Tuesday nights, and then your body is forcing you to make it up the rest of the week. And so you're exhausted on some days, and then it's hard to maintain good routines on others. It's like, okay, since you're not saving any time, we're better off just getting the same amount every single night, the amount you need. Most people have to wake up at certain times for work and family responsibilities. So the time that can move is when you go to bed the night before. And so I'm always challenging people to figure out how much sleep you need. If you don't know, 7.5 hours is a good number to start with. And count back from when you need to wake up. And then you've got your bedtime. So if you got to wake up at 6 a.m., your bedtime is 10:30 if you need 7.5 hours of sleep. It's just a math problem. But the reason this shifts our relationship with time, I mean, most of us understand that the day has a beginning. We are a little fuzzier on the notion that each day has an end, but it does. There is a time it begins and a time it ends. And, maybe some people are up overnight for various reasons, but for the most part, our day is going to be this amount of time. And so if I need 7.5 hours of sleep, I have 16.5 waking hours each day to play around with. And, I can decide what to do with that. I can move different things around to fit in that 16.5 hours. But when I know the start and I know the end, then you can make more rational choices within that time. And then you start approaching time more strategically. There is this amount of time. What do I want to do with it? I think it's generally a lot of time. You can fit a lot in 16.5 hours. But knowing that number will help you just take charge and sort of exert that agency over time.
Yeah. Okay. So bedtime. Everybody's got to leave this conversation
Everyone
with
needs
nothing
a bedtime.
else with the bedtime. Bedtimes are not just for children.
They are not.
They are for everyone.
You are an adult, so if you want to blow through it because you have something really good going on, that's awesome. Sure. But you might want to have the moment of truth 30 minutes before. Set an alarm for 30 minutes before your bedtime and ask yourself, am I doing anything awesome? And if you are, great. If you are not, you're just scrolling around online, then it's time to get ready for bed and to, give yourself that gift of a better morning.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about burnout, which, kind of dovetails into our other conversation around the 996. And it's a real thing, right? It's a thing that people, many of whom are the ones listening to us today, deal with and have to confront. And I'm curious to know, based upon your experience, based upon your research, do you think that burnout is a time problem of just trying to jam too much into too finite of a window? Or do you think it's a boundary issue or a combination? Like, how do you view burnout?
Yeah, I think in many cases, burnout is about feeling a lack of control and a lack of agency over time and probably over other things as well. But I'd point out that the opposite of burnout isn't like doing less. I mean, the opposite of burnout is engagement, like actual engagement with your life, like that there are things that you feel in charge of and that you care about. And if you can't get that at work, and maybe you can't, right, you can try to put something else into your life that you do have that sense of enjoyment and control, that is, something that is exciting for you, that makes you feel engaged with life. So I'm always saying I want busy people to have a hobby. Like, I want you to have something in your life that is not work, is not caring for family members. It is something that you find intrinsically enjoyable, that you look forward to. Ideally, it is something that involves a commitment with your time so that you don't just blow through it when life gets busy. So, for instance, I sing in a choir, and that, rehearsals are at a certain time every week in a certain place, and I need to go there. And when life gets busy, sometimes it's like, oh, well, this is challenging to make happen. But you know what? I still do it. And then I'm always happy, afterwards, like, because I enjoy the singing and I enjoy being part of this, and it makes me feel more engaged with life. So, I mean, you may need to be careful about when that is. For some people, maybe a Tuesday night isn't a great idea, or a Thursday night. Maybe it's that it's something that happens on Saturday mornings that you can have control over. But having something in your life that makes you feel engaged with life is a really good antidote to burnout. I'm not saying you shouldn't address the causes of it at work if that's what's causing burnout, but, there are things we can do with the rest of our hours that can help as well.
And where do you stand on the topic of boundary setting?
Well, I am a big fan of boundaries. My personality, I don't have a whole lot of trouble setting them. I know other people may have more challenge with it. A boundary is fundamentally that you will do something if another person, doesn't do things in the way that you think they should be done, and it's only boundary if you have control over the reaction to it. So, obviously an example is that if you have somebody in your life that you are social with, and every time you hang out with them that they say something insulting, like, you can set a boundary of, I'm not going to do that anymore, right?
Sure.
I'm not going to be part of this anymore. And that's the kind of thing. Obviously it can be more challenging with work. But this is why we always want to fundamentally have options, right? Like, the most power you have in any work situation is when you could do other things. And this is about always having relationships more broadly in the professional world, other people who love you and would love to work with you, because you are known out there, and you're known, and you've kept those relationships and that network solid. And then you honestly can kind of work how you want to work. And, people will learn that your boundaries mean something because you have other options. So, I think you always want to approach life from that perspective.
And I think that where it presents for a lot of assistants is, supporting these executives who are just kind of this tornado, centrifuge of energy and things going on, and they just sort of draw everything in, and it's this very 24/7 type of cycle. And I think it can be a fundamental challenge to those assistants supporting those types of individuals to maintain some sense of boundary, time for themselves, time for the work, and how do they kind of compartmentalize the time and and not trade off, right, with how they're perceived by their boss or feel like they're not delivering according to the expectations their boss has.
Yeah, I think one of the best ways I've heard this sort of boundary setting is to always frame boundaries in a positive way. There's a great book called Uptime by Laura Martin. And she mentioned, instead of being like, I'm not available by Slack after 6 p.m., what you say is like, I'm available by Slack between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Mm-hmm. It's like you're mm-hmm. focused on the availability there. Mm-hmm. Or like, I will check messages between 8 and 9 p.m. Mm-hmm. Right. And so your executive knows that actually if they need something at night, that you will get to it within that time. Mm-hmm. But that also means you are not available between, say, 5:30 and 8 or mm-hmm. after 9 p.m. Right. And so sometimes that helps with, you don't need to give 24/7 availability to have good availability. And so working with the person to say like, well, what does it, is it just that you don't want to go from 5:30 to 8:30 in the morning with no availability? Well, what could we do that would be mutually beneficial to both of us? And maybe it's that there is an hour where you're available for check-ins at night, mm-hmm. but then it's not 24/7.
Sure. It's boundary setting, but still offering spaciousness to address the executive's need.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about this book you have coming out in May. How is it different? What is the value proposition of this book? And tell us more about it.
Well, Big Time is subtitled A Simple Path to Time Abundance, and that's really what it is. It's about what happens when we move beyond a mindset of time scarcity and start to see time as abundant, what changes in our lives. I really do think it is possible to fall in love with our schedules, and this book has lots of practical tips on how to do just that.
I love that. As we wrap up, apart from the bedtime, what are a few small practical changes someone could start doing literally today? They listen to your podcast, they're inspired, they want to fall in love with their schedule, as you say. What can they start doing today to start making that happen?
Well, I definitely think that, putting into place a weekly planning ritual is going to have massive benefits for your life. I think when we talked about doing that calendar triage, of looking forward to the next week and seeing, what is most important, what can go. That can free up tons of time, both for you, for your executive that you're working with. And just, in general, watching our story, like that it's human nature to construct our stories based on these stressful moments. And when you catch yourself doing that, try to say, well, was there another moment in my life today? Like, okay, these stressful things happened. What else happened? This is one of the reasons I like tracking my time, is because I see all of it, right? I see the stressful moments and I see the less stressful moments. And I think you can start to construct an alternative narrative. And the more we can tell ourselves that story, the better we will feel. Yeah.
I like that in so many things, not just time, but just also just how we look at the good and the bad of life in general, right? And not overly fixating on the bad stuff that happens to us. Final question for you, Laura. We usually ask our guests who they would like to support. Given your expertise, it's a slightly different question. So if there's any leader, past or present, that you could have helped create more abundance in their life and schedule and time for, who would you have wanted to advise?
Well, I mean, I think it would be fun to do something historic with this, because I think it would be fascinating to see like Queen Elizabeth, like the first one, right? Like back in like 1500.
Right.
What did her life look like? Like, what was her schedule, And I mean, there's some cool things going on. I mean, she was seeing Shakespeare, when it was performed the first time. But, so I'm very curious what that life would have looked like. And so I would have enjoyed seeing that time log.
Yeah, and you would have been writing the time logs and reading them by candlelight, which would have
been... By candlelight, that's true. That's true. And in Old English as well.
Yes. That's great.
Ye old time log here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Laura, again, for spending your precious time with us. This has been a really, really wonderful and insightful conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.